lot of practical support. Sometimes people don't need that or want that at all, but sometimes they might need to get to the number 10 so that they have a minyan. They need people to come to be there. Sometimes they don't really want or need anything specifically, but it still matters that we show up. Even if they're not saying, oh, I only have 3 people who are going to be at my house, could you please make sure I have 10? It still matters to look around the room and see that CBE showed up. Your community was there. And so we thought the Chesed team had this idea that it might be a good idea to have a conversation as a community about the dynamics of Shiva. What is it like in that first week? Now, I am guessing that probably many people in this room have had the experience of being in Shiva. And so we're actually going to take time today to turn it over to you at some point to talk to each other about your own experiences, either visiting people in Shiva or being yourself in the experience of Shiva. But what we want to get to is a place where we demystify it, we take out the awkwardness, where we name the awkwardness, just like own it, but then also move through it. Kind of like Rabbi Cullen was talking about fear. And we get to the point where we're just really used to showing up for each other. There's my hidden agenda right there. Okay. And so 4 wonderful people who are members of our community agreed to be part of this conversation and help and share their stories, their own experiences, some very recent, some less recent. And I just want to thank each of you so much for being willing to be in front of everyone else and share your experience. So let me tell you who these 4 wonderful people are, because you should know them all. Doris Traub has been a member of CBE since 1983 with her husband Jeffrey and their daughters Rebecca, Lily, and Michelle. Doris is going to be speaking about her experience mourning her brother Bruce, who died in July of this year. Very recent. Noam Beal has been a member of CBE since 2019 with his wife Margaret and their children Rosemary and Anina and Bram. And Noam's going to be speaking about mourning his daughter Anina, or Noni, who died in August of 2019. Joanne Feld has been a member of CBE since 2008 with her husband Scott. They have 2 sons, Avery and Robert. She's going to be speaking about her experience mourning her mother Barbara, who died in November of 2021. And Ian Levine has been a member of CBE since 2012 with his wife Tamar and 2 kids, Maya and Liam. He's going to be speaking about mourning his father, Sidney, who died in May of this year. So I'm going to start by turning it over to Doris. They're each going to speak for just a few minutes, like 5 minutes, and then we're going to have a chance for each of you to turn to each other and share your own reflections, and then I'll offer some teachings from Judaism. That's the plan. Doris.
Shana Tova. So that thud of the dirt on the pine box, that awful thud of the dirt on the pine box, and then you come home. For me, with the death of my brother, I experienced it very differently from when I lost my parents. As hard and difficult as it was losing my parents at the ages of 94 and 98 respectively, as difficult as that was, this felt very different to me. My brother, my soul sibling, the person who I knew longest in the entire world, the person who knew me the longest in the entire world, the only person who really knew our childhood, our adolescence, going on to college, on, and the person with whom I shared caring for my parents and making very critical decisions about their care. My contemporary. Death and mortality felt and still feels very, very close. For the first time, starting at the burial, I felt pulled towards the grave. So I've come to feel like the traditions we have for mourning are somewhat on a continuum. So we go from the burial to Shiva. And for me, I felt Shiva was the beginning of kind of a tug of war where I felt pulled in one direction towards death and in the other direction towards life. And having people there at Shiva, I really feel that they pulled me. They pulled me towards life. They pulled me towards feeling gratitude for my brother's life, for my life, and for choosing life's goodness. Rabbi Timona, you're saying we rehearsed for death. It felt very much like that to me. And I can't say it's over, but the people at Shiva really made the difference. And to hearken to something that Rabbi Colin said this morning, where she talked about God's words, do not be afraid, I feel like their presence and their kind words were saying to me, do not be afraid. You can do this. As hard as it's going to be, you can move forward thinking about life rather than feeling like death is hovering over you. The people at Shiva supported me simply by being there. And I want to mention this because my brother passed away on July 1st. It was a July 4th weekend. Most of my friends, and I certainly have plenty of friends in this community, 40 years here, most of them were away. I personally don't have a big concern about a minion. I don't feel that that's important to me. But all these people showed up from CBE, people I never knew. And I have to confess that although I always read every CBE Mourns email, because I like just honoring the lives of these people, it never occurred to me to go to a Shiva for someone I had never met. I'm embarrassed to say it, but it never occurred to me. I certainly would go to anyone I knew, even vaguely, but go to somebody I had never met. And yet these people really provided a very caring and loving community and were incredibly helpful to me. And that includes people who are sitting up here. So I thank them for that. And I've learned, and I'm hoping that by sharing that with you, people will feel that they can go and they should go, and that our presence alone is helpful to the person who is mourning. And just bearing witness to the memories that you have a chance to share with people. So as I said, I do feel like there's this continuum, even though we shift back and forth on it. We have the burial, the Shiva, Shloshim. In terms of Kaddish, Rabbi, you have made me focus on the fact that that prayer is not about death, that it's really about gratitude for God and for life. But I also learned something else from you that I want to share in case somebody else has the opportunity to use this. When I was sitting by my brother's bedside as he was passing away, you told me that it was traditional for the person who was dying to say the Shema, and that if not, I could say it for him. And so I held his hand and said the Shema for him. And now, every time I am in this community and we all say the Shema together, I feel like he's with me, holding my hand, that my parents are there. And it's become a very important and meaningful part of mourning for me. So I thank you for that. So Rabbi Timona asked us to talk about what we can all do for one another. I think the first thing is show up. You don't have to know the person, just show up. Ask for stories and bear witness to those stories. Just listen as empathetically as you can. And the last little piece I'd say is I found it particularly helpful when people who were speaking to me recognized the special relationship of the person I had lost, that this was my brother, that relationship can be different than a parent, a child. Every loss is painful, but can be experienced differently, which makes total sense if we think about it. And finally, I just wanted to mention a book that I found tremendously helpful. I didn't know that Rabbi Grant was going to be here, but the CCAR, Central Conference of American Rabbis, just came out with this book, The Year of Mourning, which Rabbi Grant edited. I found it tremendously helpful, so I mention it in case somebody else has a need.
I'm Noam Beal, and as Rabbi Timoner mentioned, in August of 2019, my daughter Anina died in a choking accident. She was 16 months old. Before Anina died, I had not experienced a sudden, unexpected death of someone very close to me. I had lost grandparents, including the one for whom Anina was named, and an uncle. But those were losses that I could make sense of in the linear narrative of my life. Losing a child, it is often said, is unnatural, a break in the order of time. And I experienced it that way. From one moment to the next, suddenly the structure of my existence did not make sense. Rituals, which for me had had little meaning, became all important as practices to impose structure on a world that no longer had any. Anina died at her grandparents' house in Connecticut and was buried there in a funeral service led by the parish priest from my in-laws' local Catholic church. He asked me what I wanted in the service, and I said, "Whatever it is you do, just tell me what to do." And he used the rituals from his tradition to lead us through that impossible event, with my mother singing El Malay Rachamim alongside the Catholic liturgy. We then drove down to Brooklyn, and a Shiva committee made up of colleagues from my law firm and from my wife's office had organized Shiva to begin the following day. Our Shiva committee did all the work getting the word out and organizing food and other logistics. One of my law partners, who is a member of CBE, was on the committee, but the rest were not Jewish. And this is one of the great things I think about living in New York City. The 4 non-Jewish members knew exactly what a Shiva was and what to do. We decided to sit for 5 days instead of 7, and we took a break in the middle of the day to rest. Interacting with dozens of people throughout the day was incredibly intense. In those early days, my mind was constantly racing. Thinking about ways that the day that Anina died could have gone differently, trying to solve an impossible and unsolvable problem to undo reality. Nothing until that first day of sitting Shiva allowed my mind to rest, but the exhaustion of talking with so many people all day put me to sleep. I realized that evening the brilliance of our ancestors to create a sleeping pill before the invention of pharmacology. I'm still in awe of how many people came. Hundreds over the course of 5 days, crammed into our 800 square foot apartment. They ranged from my best friend since kindergarten, who immediately got on a plane in California and flew here and attended every day of the Shiva, to strangers, the doorman of the building next door to us, whom I'd never spoken to, but who heard and had to come. And because of our jobs, my wife and I, many people from the legal community came. I'm a criminal defense lawyer, and my wife is a federal prosecutor. So for 5 days, there was a détente. And I will never forget the moment that an entire squad of DEA agents arrived, packing into our small living room, and each one hugging me, with the kind of hug you can imagine getting from a muscle-bound federal agent wearing a t-shirt 2 sizes too small. Before Anina died, I had attended Shivas as a guest and never knew what to say to the person in mourning. Platitudes like, "I'm sorry for your loss," felt trite and awkward to me. But I can tell you, as the bereaved, no one said anything wrong. Some people cried with me, some joked with me, some said, "I'm sorry for your loss," and it was exactly the right thing to say. I remember one woman came, didn't speak to me at all. She just walked around taking dishes from people as they used them, went to my kitchen sink, washed them, dried them, and carefully put them away, and then left. In fact, I don't remember what most people said, but I remember they were there. So don't worry about it. Ever since then, when I've been to a Shiva or called a friend who's in mourning, I still, to this day, don't know what to say. Though now when I say, "I'm sorry for your loss," people think, "Oh man, this guy really gets it." One thing that I would recommend against is asking, "What can I do for you?" Lots of people asked me this, and I knew this question came from a place of love and from our friends and neighbors wanting to do something, anything, to ease our pain. But it was a question I didn't know how to answer, and not knowing the answer made me feel worse. Toward the end of the Shiva, a work colleague came over carrying a pitcher. She said, "Everyone is asking you what they can do for you. I have homemade lemonade. Can I pour you a glass of lemonade?" That question I knew how to answer. I still remember how refreshing that glass of lemonade tasted. Then after the Shiva was over, the next day, my wife and I visited Rabbi Timoner in her office, and I asked, "What do I do next?" I needed the next phase of structure to help me move through the world. She explained the rituals around Shloshim, the 30 days after the death of a loved one, and then the first year of mourning. Of course, my process of grief has been longer than a year. It is still ongoing. But having these markers, these rituals, was vital for me to get through that first year. In Abraham Joshua Heschel's The Sabbath, he writes, "Judaism is a religion of time, aiming at the sanctification of time." I don't consider myself a religious person, and the loss of my daughter did not make me more religious. But leaning on rituals and practices that have carried us as a people through our long and often tragic history, it did make me more fully Jewish. Although marked by tremendous pain, I will always remember sitting Shiva for Anina as a sanctified, holy time.
So I come because Rabbi Timoner knows me from my mother's passing. But when I was 8, almost 9, my father was killed in a car accident. So I think there's something about Shiva when it's sudden, and a Shiva for my mother that we could plan for. So I have I'm very practical, so I have like some bullet points about things you can offer, whether it's sudden and traumatic or something you can plan for a long time. And sort of big picture, I think what we've all said and what we'll all say is that Jews do death really well. There's something so comforting about knowing what the practice is and the ritual is. Because life, again, whether it's sudden or planned, you feel like your ground has come undone. And Shiva and the ritual of death is so grounding and familiar and safe. So my first thing I want to say is you got to show up. You got to go for 30 minutes, go for 10 minutes to the Shiva. And you give a look, you give a hug, you tell a funny story if you can, you tell a sad story. Ideally, it's a story that the mourner hasn't heard about the family. It was really cool to hear stories I had never heard about my mother. I didn't know she did that or went there or did that. It was just I thought I knew her, and then I didn't know her. And it was kind of an interesting time to get to know her more. As has been said, you have to go and be you, because we were all still us. And it's always weird when you can just tell that people are weird and awkward. It's just be you. I want you. I want you to be there for me and be you for me. The next point I want to make is that I have a friend whose mother passed away this summer, and I did text her and I said, "What can I do? I'm coming to the Shiva," and she said, "Don't come to the Shiva. We're meeting you at 7 a.m. and we're going for a walk in the park, because I need to get out." I'm like, great. Where, when, I'm there. So listen to the mourner. Listen to what they need and what they want, and be flexible. Again, because I'm practical, I'm going to tell you not to bring food, because there's so many black and white cookies and babkas, and your body is so depleted that you need healthy, I know I'm sort of preaching, but you need healthy food. So hopefully there's a meal train or somebody's organizing food. Get in touch with that person. And my other piece of advice is get in touch a week or two later and say, "I'm bringing over soup, I'm bringing over a challah, I'm bringing over a casserole." That's so nourishing in so many ways. And my last pointer is, I'm a big fan, as Rabbi Timono knows, of minyans and davening. And if there's a minyan, then you have to go, because it's another time for community for the mourners. It's another time to hear that story or that joke. It's a time for the mourners to have structure in their Shiva day. It's a time where you can say Kaddish at home, and saying Kaddish at home is actually pretty amazing, rather than being in synagogue. And I was gonna sort of be silly and have a pro tip, but if you can have a Shiva on a Saturday night and Cantor Josh comes with his guitar to say Havdalah, that's really powerful.
So I began my professional life as a nurse and have a lot of experience of working with and caring for the dying, especially when I worked in India and in a refugee camp in Sudan. And so as my father's last days approached, I thought, I've got this. I know how to be with the dying. But caring for your own father is very different from caring for strangers. And as I washed him and changed him in his last days, as he must have washed and changed me when I was a baby, it was very difficult, emotional, touching. His death, though, was much to be grateful for in so many ways. He was 99. He died at home. His whole family was around him. He was in no pain. He had no medication. He'd had a wonderful marriage of 64 years to my mother, and he had, though I say it myself, 4 great kids and 5 even better grandkids. So it was a good life, and there was much to be thankful for, even as we mourned him. As I had told Rabbi Timona before he died, I was very anxious about the Shiva for 2 reasons. Firstly, my parents are Orthodox. They belong to an Orthodox shul, one run by a man with a black hat and a gray beard, as you described in your Rosh Hashanah sermon. And secondly, my parents had, in their retirement years, they had gone to live in the south of England to a town called Brighton, which is sort of the Florida of England, except with much, much better politics. But it wasn't my community. It wasn't the community I'd grown up in, and their friends were not my friends. They were people I knew vaguely, but I didn't really know them, and I really wasn't sure how it was going to be to mourn my father within a Jewish ritual that was no longer my own and with people I didn't know. But I was wrong. The structure and the ritual that the others have described was incredibly comforting. We covered the mirrors, we tore our clothing, we sat on low stools, people came to visit. My brothers and I said Kaddish together every night. My mother and my sister couldn't, but my brothers and I did. And it was extraordinarily comforting and in some ways almost joyful. We were together as a family, the whole family was together. There were no distractions, no work. We had time to be together, time to remember my father, to tell stories about him, to make fun of him, because sometimes he was a bit silly. We had the opportunity to recall his achievements. And we had, and as others have said, and this was extraordinarily comforting, we had the opportunity to hear stories about him, to hear about ways in we had touched the lives of other people, even people I didn't know. But when they came and told stories about things he told them, ways he had touched their lives, ways he'd helped them, just how much they had enjoyed his company in the synagogue or elsewhere, it was extremely comforting. I remember on the last day, somebody said to us, you know, there's been another death in the community. It's a small branch, it's a small Jewish community. It's not Brooklyn. And they didn't know if we would have a minyan, a quorum of 10 men, to be able to say Kaddish that night. And I was amazed by how anxious that made me, because I really wanted to be able to say Kaddish. And of course, in that community, it's not 10 people. It has to be 10 Jewish men to be able to say Kaddish. And when 13 men turned up to allow us to say Kaddish, it really was a moment of not just great relief, but sort of almost happiness that we were able to on the last night of Shiva, remember him and say Kaddish for him. But it wasn't enough, because that was not my community. It was my family, but it wasn't my community. And it was really important to me to come home to Brooklyn and to be able to remember my father here. And I talked to Rabbi Timona, and I asked if it would be okay to have not a formal Shiva, because we had such Shiva, but an opportunity to be together and remember my father. And we did, and we had some 35 people came to the house, and there was no formal ritual as such, although I did say Kaddish, but it was really just a chance for me and Tamar and Maya and Liam to remember my dad and to tell stories about him and to talk about what he meant to us and to talk about what his death meant. And that for me was just a wonderful kind of, not completion, because obviously the morning still goes on, but it helped bring that week of Shiva to an end, because there I was able to sit with people in my life, in my daily life. They hadn't known my dad, but they gave me the chance to talk about him and tell stories about him and talk about what he meant to me. So, final words of wisdom, I have very little to say, because really the other panelists have said it all. More than anything, it's be there. You don't have to worry, as Noam said very wisely. It's not about what you need to do. It's being there. It's just the act of solidarity. It's the presence that I think for me is something I remember when I think about the things that comforted me and gave me joy during that period. It's presence. Thank you.
I want to thank all of you so much for sharing what it was like, what your thoughts were, the things that helped, the things that mattered. And I want to now invite everyone here in the sanctuary to be part of this conversation. If we were in a different setup, we would just turn your chairs toward each other. What I'd ideally like would be groups of 3, 4, to find other people near you and just take a few minutes to share what you've learned, whether from being a mourner or from comforting mourners in Shiva, what you've learned, any experience that you had that you think is salient, that you think that we could collectively learn from. just reflect together a little bit. It won't be that long. I actually need to find a timepiece to find out how long it will be, but I'll figure that out. And I'll call you back soon. But right now, if you would just share with each other.
As important as it was to be with family as well, I needed to find a way of marking it. My people, yeah. Don't worry. Yeah. Should we, is it worth us coming back to do it again, or is it just the same thing? No.
No, I mean, I would say if you want, but no need to.
Okay.
It's gonna, I mean, there's very few people who say yes. It's gonna take time to have that written that people feel familiar about. Yeah. There was one.
I've never been called.
I got called for one, but I was so.
I did Phyllis Spillman, whose family donated his flowers. She was a member of her husband was president. She, her death really organized all of it. It was women, but it was 7 all survivors. So it was my one time, and I was like, I realized that it was people like when it happens, it was.
This says there's other people there who will like guiding you. Yeah.
So I'm going to call you back in 2 minutes. So if there's anybody in your group who hasn't spoken, make sure they have time to speak. 2 minutes. Okay, wrap up those conversations. All right, come on back. Wrap up and come on back. You all were so engaged with each other. I was reluctant to transition back, but I want to have a chance to hear your insights. So what I'd like to do is just structure this with an invitation that either to share something that came out of your conversation that you think is worth people hearing, or a question that was raised, or a question you have for our panel, or you and vice versa, you could ask questions of them, but basically to just add to the really incredible wisdom that's already been shared here at the front of the room with what you've learned. So I invite you to share something you heard, share something that you're thinking about, something you learned, a question you have, and we'll grow the conversation like that. Robin.
Thank you. Rabbi Grant shared that traditionally at a Shiva, you wouldn't approach the mourner and start speaking to them. You would wait for the mourner to speak first because maybe they're just not up to being spoken to at that moment. I will say, and I'm on the Shiva Minyan, so now I've started going to Shiva for people where I don't know the mourner and I don't know the deceased. When I think back to when my dad died and I sat Shiva and people came, so I was not aware of this tradition, and I feel like I personally would have thought it was a little weird if all these people came but nobody was speaking to me because they were waiting for me to speak to them. So I'm just kind of wondering, because in our community, I don't know how many people might know the tradition and want to honor it versus how many people don't know the tradition and might think it was weird if people weren't walking up to them and speaking to them. So as someone who will likely keep going to Shivas where I don't know, I'm hoping for some guidance.
So that's on my list of things I was wanting to make sure we taught at this in this hour, and I think most people don't know about that tradition, and I think most people would find it awkward if you just came in and stood silently. But I think that what we can glean from it is two things. First of all, for people to know about it, and second, what it's saying is to respond to the cues of the mourner, right? And so if you walk into a room and there's lots of people talking, you walk into Shiva and there's lots of people talking, obviously it's an environment where it's working for that. It seems to be that if the mourner's engaged in that talking, it seems like that's working and that's distracting and it's maybe making them laugh, and that's really wonderful. And if you walk into an environment where the mourner's sitting by themselves and taking a moment and being quiet, you don't just bust right over and start chatting. You take a moment and just see, what are you gleaning from what you can observe about their behavior that gives you a sense of how to be sensitive and to engage them in a way that's going to be not awkward and also compassionate for where they are. And I feel like that's the way we might adapt that tradition to our world now. Rabbi Grant.
Yeah, I think that's definitely going in the right direction. I mean, one thing that the Chesed committee can do, and others, is just to make sure that the mourner doesn't feel like they're the host of the party. And that's a really important gift that we can provide as visitors to really, and it's not just about providing food and cleaning up, but that they don't have to feel obliged to entertain anybody.
I'd say that that is the single most important thing that's going to be conveyed during this hour, besides these beautiful words. That's the most, if there was one thing I want you to know, is that when you have a death, you are not a host at a cocktail party. You are not. You are not. It's not your job. Not your job to feed people. Not your job to make sure they have things to drink. Not your job. Not your job. And when you come to someone's house who's in Shiva, they're not hosting a cocktail party. Don't expect to eat. If there's food, great, enjoy. But their job is not to put on a party for you. Their job is to be a mourner. And you're there to comfort them. And I think that's the single most important thing that we get wrong in our society. And almost everyone I know, even if I tell them that, because I do, if you've been through death that I've been involved with supporting you, I have said to you, you're not hosting a cocktail party. And you've all said, yeah, but I have to. I mean, 100% of people say to me, yeah, but I have to. So in my perfect world, we would change that. And we would make sure as a community that there was food and drink. And I know somebody said don't bring food, but I mean, maybe not sweets, but like nourishing food. And that we would also make sure that that person could feel like they could sit down and they could send cues. They would have the liberty to not want someone to talk to them. Like that would be amazing. Or if they felt like it, they might love to be chatting, but that they could call the shots based on what they needed in that moment and not feel like they had to be on. Could we do that? I would love it if we could do that. Does anybody want to respond to that before we take other things?
Thank you. At my stepfather's funeral, his accountant walked in, was offered food, and he goes, "Oh no, the Sephardim do not eat in the house of the dead." What? So that's all I know about that. Curious about more.
The congregation that I belong to in Jerusalem started a nursery school. And I think it was the first year or the second year, a child opened a closet door and a ladder fell on the child and killed him. So of course I went to the Shiva. And the mother kept pressing food on me and I kept saying no thank you. But somebody told me afterwards, the mother was Sephardi, and that you're supposed to eat something because it's an opportunity to make a bracha. So there are many customers.
So I'll get you in a second, Molly. So we're hearing different ideas here. But also, when I said the thing about not expecting to eat, if you can eat, like you absolutely can eat, you shouldn't feel like bad about eating. That sometimes that is actually part of comforting a person, is to be there and eat in their home. It's all about responding to the cues. This question about Sephardic practice, perhaps Molly's about to answer it, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question, and maybe someone in the room does, and if not, we can find out.
I definitely don't know the answer about Sephardic practice, but what I am hearing is there are so many different traditions. I'm so glad that the part about not hosting a party came up, because I don't think Shiva scales well, and it can feel really, I don't know, you just lose the moment. You lose that opportunity for grounding and storytelling. But what I'm hearing is, how do we educate each other on each other's traditions and what makes us feel grounded? There's the core of what Shiva is, that's universal and beautiful. But those traditions of, no, I want to be able to host you, or I want to, be able to sit and storytell. How can we signal that? How can each person have the opportunity to signal that in a way that makes it a little bit more explicit, that maybe helps people support them in a more intentional way?
I love that question, right? Because it might be that for some mourners, to host a party actually feels like the best way for them to be comforted. And no one should feel bad about that, right? And I wonder, Karen, Rob, as we're saying this, I wonder if there's a role for Chesed in terms of communicating the wishes of the mourner, if we can figure out how to do that so that our community gets a clearer idea of what is wished for at Shiva. I haven't been looking over here. Have you all been wishing to respond to anything? Or you're good? Okay.
So two things. One is I will say that when we had a Shiva, one of the best things that happened was that two of my friends came over, and one of them, and they just organized it. One of them said, I'm in charge of getting the room ready, because our apartment was not really set up to have a bunch of people in it, and I'm in charge of the shopping, and you can sit there if you want, or you can leave. We're making the shopping list. Don't worry about it. To your point of you're not the host, and the relief was like physical, honestly. I have a question also, something that came up here, not related though, so I don't know if it's time to go to a different topic. Okay. So, a lot of us come from families and backgrounds with a lot of different traditions in them, and the wishes of the person who may have died may be different from what the survivor would like to do. And so what are some words of wisdom on how to navigate that?
It's a great question. And I wonder if there's anybody. It's on me, okay. I think that one of the things that's beautiful about Jewish mourning practices is the recognition that the people who are the focus of the mourning practice are the mourners. And yes, the point is honoring the life of the person who died, and the funeral is very much about that, but there's a real emphasis on the needs of the mourners. And so I think that question is a really important question, because you are going to want, in honoring the deceased, to pay attention to what they would have wanted, but I always tip toward what the mourners need, especially if what the deceased would have wanted would deny the mourners from a kind of ritual comfort that would be meaningful to them. So I often have a situation where people will say, well, my parent or the person who died, wasn't religious, wouldn't want anything about God, wouldn't want any kind of Jewish practice, but I need Shiva. That to me is a no-brainer. Like, of course. And so that's one kind of example. There are other kinds of examples, and I think some of them are trickier than others. But I think it's important to say that these practices are designed to comfort the mourners. That's their purpose. And that I tend to privilege that. It's a case-by-case situation, but I tend to privilege that. Rabbi Grant, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, I think it's, I tend to, it's not clear cut, but I make a distinction between up to the burial process, there's really the principle that should be followed is kavod hamet, giving honor to the deceased, to really taking care of the deceased and in as meaningful a way as possible, through tahara, we now have a chevra kadisha and other ways of, creating an experience that honors the life and the death of the person. But after the burial, it does turn to comforting the mourners, because we are a religion that privileges life, and we want to support those who live on.
Thank you. Okay, Carol, and then I'm going to just share a few things from the tradition that I want to make sure no one leaves without hearing. So, but Carol, first yours.
I've forgotten the second man's name, the man's name, but I was really curious how you negotiated is not the right word, but between your in-laws and your family and wanting to do Shiva, and how they felt and whether they were a part of it and whether you wanted them to be a part of it in any way.
Yeah, they, so we did the burial near their house, and it wasn't really, there were choices made, but all the choices that were made in those early days were very, it was hard to make any choices. We just sort of made them and moved on. So part of the reason that the burial was more Catholic was just because the priest was on hand. And then they came down from Connecticut for the Shiva and stayed a couple of days, and my family was there for the entire time. And so it was sort of ad hoc, but everything kind of felt right as a mix of the traditions. You know, and I should say that I come from a very culturally and intellectually Jewish, but not religious family. I didn't grow up a member of a synagogue. And my wife's family, they grew up going to church, but they're all to different extents lapsed Catholics at this point. So it was not so hard between those two traditions to land on Reform Judaism at CBE.
And Noam hasn't mentioned it, but then after the Shiva, we ended up having a service here, and the ritual of the bench in the park, and so there was a really significant amount of Jewish ritual that followed.
I'll just add one other thing. I mean, my wife now is like, why doesn't everyone just do Shiva? You know, it's the thing to do. Like, you know, when she's talked to people who, you know, people she knows who have lost someone who are not Jewish, she's sort of like, you should try to incorporate some aspect of this tradition because it's really helpful. So
things I want to make sure everybody gets. One of the really practical things, it was raised a little bit here, and is practical needs of mourners, like really making sure they have food. Not just right in the beginning, but for the few weeks afterwards, making sure, I guess a really simple thing you can do is just, if it's a person you know, is just to call them and say, I'm just gonna bring dinner like 2 weeks later. You know, just to be checking out for their material needs. And we, as a community, can offer a meal train and do sometimes. And that's a way that you can provide that comfort for someone you don't know. And many people do that. And there may be other practical needs that people have in that first week that they're just trying to figure out, if they have kids, figuring out who's going to watch the kids at various points, errands they might need run. Let's see. You might know, you might not know that mourners traditionally sit on a low stool or like a low chair and don't rise to greet visitors. So like with that kind of cocktail party idea of like needing to greet everybody, that just feels, I think, instinctive to a lot of people in American society. But traditionally, you would sit and not get up, and people would come in and figure it out, you know, and they'd be able to come over to you, and it wouldn't be your job to make sure that they were greeted at the door. We talked about entering quietly and reading the cues in the room, responding to what you see the mourner needs. That person who came and just washed all the dishes, I mean, things like that are just like being perceptive about what is needed. Sometimes lively conversation is a great distraction. Sometimes it's exhausting. And just try to tune in. If you see that a mourner or the mourners are tired, if they seem like they're ready for privacy, just politely take leave. You can check first before walking out the door. You can see, like, it seems like you're tired. I think I'm going to go now. And they might say to you, no, I actually really I'm really wanting to stay in conversation. Okay, well then listen to that. You heard about stories and memories. If you knew the person and have the ability to share a memory or a story, you are adding to that tapestry. I often say this at Shiva, but like I feel like every person who comes with a story is bringing a thread. And what we're doing together is weaving this tapestry. And the bigger it gets, the more that all of us walk away with in the story of this person's life. And it is such a comfort when you're a mourner to hear stories you didn't know, or stories you forgot about, memories that you maybe weren't top of mind, but that the person is raising for you to get again. And sometimes it then has associations with all other kinds of stories and memories that were not being accessed. It's really, really one of the most comforting things you can do. I think those are the pieces of Jewish wisdom I want to make sure we add. I want to just say one more thing, which is that this book is an amazing book. It just came out. Right here, Lisa Grant, our member, Rabbi Lisa Grant, is the editor. And we are going to start actually putting it in we bring a Shiva bag to everyone who's had a death with a fresh beit challah and some rugelach, and we're going to start putting the book in that bag, so everyone's going to get it. And Rabbi Grant is going to be teaching a 2-part class about the book and about mourning in December. Do you remember? Sometime in December. 12th and 19th. Nate Jaffe for the win. So there's going to be more opportunity to learn. And if you're hearing this and you're thinking to yourself, you know what, this is the essence of Jewish community. This is the thing that matters most, which you would not be wrong. This is like really one of the most important things we do. And you're thinking to yourself, I want to be part of this. Well, you can be. And we have, as I mentioned, a chesed team. We have a shiva team. You can sign up, and you can sign up to be a person who bakes a fresh challah and brings a bag, or you can sign up to be a person who shows up at a minyan. And you can be a person who you can sign up to be a person who helps to structure Shiva. A person maybe needs help setting up their house for Shiva right after the funeral, or they need help with greeting someone at the door, or they need help with practical things around Shiva. We have people who do that. So if you're hearing this and you're thinking, gosh, that's something I want to be a part of, chesed@cbebk.org. And the Sukkot Block Party is a time when all the things are going to be there that you can sign up for, and you can come and you can sign up and get connected to this work. Well, let's see. I'm sorry. It's about the minyan. Oh yes, because Amanda runs the minyanim. Go ahead. Was that audible on this side of the room? 100%. Okay, you can sign up with Amanda if you want to make sure there's a minyan. And first of all, I want to thank our amazing panelists for sharing your life, your story, your mourning, your experience, your tips. Incredibly valuable and moving. And I want to thank all of you for, in the middle of Yom Kippur afternoon, deciding to spend an hour on this topic. This is the most important day of the year. It's not an accident. We've chosen to put this on the most important day of the year. It's that important. And so thank you for being here to be in the conversation, and thank you in advance for the ways you're going to show up for each other and make this the kind of community where everybody feels surrounded by love when they go through loss. Shana Tova, Gemar Chatima Tova. We'll be back here at 3:30.